Alright guys, we gotta talk about this Lanterns trailer. The Green Lantern Corps are some of the coolest characters in the entire DC universe, as well as being mainstays on the Justice League. Their role as the universe's premier peacekeeping force has made them a core part of some of DC's greatest stories ever, and they're home to some of the best characters the company has to offer. Hal Jordan and John Stewart in particular have been fan favorites since the latter's debut in the early 70s, and so when James Gunn first unveiled plans for a live-action HBO-produced Lanterns show back in January of 2023, you remember that announcement video? It feels like it's been an eternity from now, but regardless, I was hyped as all hell for this thing. Despite being some of DC's flagship heroes, the Green Lanterns have had a rocky road, to put it mildly, on screen. You don't need me to tell you about the failure of the 2011 film. Hell, Ryan Reynolds will spend half his career doing that for you. But fans of the comics have longed for a genuine adaptation that demonstrates why people love these characters so much. And sure, judging from its first trailer, Lanterns might not be the epic space-centric show many dreamed of. There's been a fair amount of criticism of this teaser online, just in absurd amounts, and I'm kind of two minds, because I completely understand people wanting an intergalactic space cop show that highlights the epic, intergalactic, and fantastical battles the Green Lanterns have. But since its inception, Lanterns has always been pitched as a more grounded take on these characters. I get why there's backlash, sure, but it's not like James Gunn or DC ever lied about what the show is. I mean, they hired the team from True Detective to make a True Detective-inspired Green Lantern show. Like, why are we all surprised that this trailer is looking exactly like that? Now, fair enough, if you've always been out here criticizing the fact that it's like, oh, that's not really what I want from Green Lantern. You know what? Fine, I get it. Maybe the show will win you over, maybe it won't. I also want to see the cosmic goodness of the Green Lantern Corps and space and all this stuff that kind of comes with that, but I also think that there's a lot of merits and validity to what they're doing here that, I mean, we gotta at least give it a shot, right? Ever since it was announced, it was always pitched as being a kind of gritty neo-Western cop drama, but with Hal Jordan and John Stewart. These two characters are the quintessential Green Lanterns, both in the comics and in virtually every adaptation the character ever had. Their relationship is one of mutual respect, but persistent tension. Two men with radically different worldviews and lived experiences who interpret their call to action as heroes and peacekeepers in very different ways. My biggest takeaway from the trailer, and honestly, if you ask me, it's the most important thing here. It's going to determine the success of these characters, of the Green Lanterns, in the future of the DCU. Like, it kind of boils down to that, but it's the chemistry between Kyle Chandler and Aaron Pierre, alongside the clear antagonistic relationship between them. There's definitely some tension between both men that likely stems from Jordan's experience and jadedness, combined with the character's trademark hot streak and maverick-like approach, mixed with Stewart's idealism and inexperience, as well as his more rational and calculated demeanor that stems from his time as a Marine and an architect. Sure, I have my own concerns about the project and the way it's adapting DC's most vibrant interstellar heroes, and I'm not going to say that this trailer was the greatest thing I've ever seen, but I also think Lanterns has the potential to be an excellent showcase of these two main characters and finally do them justice on screen in live action, celebrating what makes Hal and John so iconic and putting a unique spin on the usual serialized superhero TV show. DC have proven its ability to balance different tones and genres in recent years, and I think that's one of the reasons why I'm continually drawn to what Gunn is doing in architecting with the DCU. It's fresh, it's interesting. If you like the cosmic flavor, the colorful comic book vibes that we've been kind of asking for so long, we've got Superman, we've got animated stuff like Creature Commandos, and we've also got Supergirl, which we haven't really seen the film yet, but that looks to kind of be pulling from similar cosmic influences and such like that. But then there's also room for stuff like Lanterns, a grounded, character-driven, mature piece that looks like it's in the same vein as HBO's Watchmen. And while that might be a bit of a head-scratcher for some, because it's like, oh, why do we need Green Lanterns to be like Watchmen? I don't know. I find that to be a very compelling way of adapting these characters, specifically because they are space cops, and so there's a lot of just commentary that you can make about the nature of intergalactic law enforcement and how that pertains to Earth and, the United States, and like using these neo-Western vibes to comment on American superheroes. Like, there's a lot to kind of pull from this trailer and what little we have, despite it not really giving us a full look at everything. Like, I think there's just going to be a lot of meat on the bone with this series, and that's kind of what any good show or film, I mean, it doesn't even have to be a superhero, but that's what we should want out of our superhero media. Like, yes, we want, all these different trappings and the aesthetics and stuff like that, and I'm sure we'll get that later down the road. It's not like this is going to be what Lanterns is in the DCU for eternity. I just think that as an entryway to start with character and then build them up to the point where we can place them in an intergalactic setting and then have our minds blown and have us be really invested in the journey, they're putting character first and then the more fantastical elements for when we get a fucking Jon Stewart movie, which feels like it's going to be inevitable. That's going to be like the Green Lantern movie. I think it's worth remembering as well that this is the same studio that released Peacemaker Season 2 and The Penguin a year apart. Lanterns is clearly going in a very particular direction with these heroes, and I think it's unfair to judge it for what it isn't, instead of what it is and what we know about it. So, allow me to share my thoughts on this initial trailer, my expectations and theories for the series, and why I think it could be one of the most intriguing projects in the entire DCU, potentially one of the best. Despite James Gunn taking to Threads to announce that the trailer for Lanterns was going to be dropping Thursday, someone at Warner Brothers, they fucked up. they fucked up pretty bad, but you know what, who really cares? They posted the trailer to YouTube a day early, so, they decided to just release it, go with the flow, and instead of trying to stop it, they're just like, whatever, here's the Lanterns trailer. In the trailer, we get our first proper look at Kyle Chandler and Aaron Pierre as Green Lanterns, Hal Jordan, and Jon Stewart, and an idea of what the show is actually about. While the trailer is fairly vague and light on obvious plots, it does showcase the relationship between Hal and Jon. We know Hal is an experienced Lantern and Jon is his student, only 2 months into his training to join the Corps. He doesn't have a ring, and there's some underlying tension between the two men regarding their mission and role as intergalactic peacekeepers. There's a big Western vibe to this trailer, which I know I was kind of expecting given the True Detective influence, but I wasn't really expecting this thing to go full blown. Like there are shots and moments in this where I'm like getting Eddington vibes, and I can't really explain why, because I know that Eddington isn't the only modern Western, if you will, to exist. It's definitely not like that. It's more along the lines of like a No Country for Old Men, but maybe it's just because Eddington is a film that I watched semi-recently, and I was just like, oh, yeah, this feels like this small town with I don't know. I can't explain it. I can't fucking explain it. But anyways, yeah, big Western vibes, and more specifically to Hal and Jon's dynamic, with Jordan being the old hardened gunslinger and Stewart the eager, more idealistic protege. Outside of the weird Eddington vibes I got from this trailer, honestly, watching it gave me flashes of Sicario and John Ford's The Searchers and Coen Brothers films like, Fargo, and especially No Country for Old Men, like I previously mentioned. The trailer also conveys the series setting, as Hal and Jon investigate a murder in the American heartland, more specifically, Nebraska, leading them into darker mysteries and reckonings. The teaser is scored to Bruce Springsteen's State Trooper, a haunting acoustic track about paranoia and impending danger, then from the singer's 1982 album, yeah, you guessed it, Nebraska. James Gunn has teased that Lanterns is a major part of his overarching plans for the DC universe, with this series likely setting up a key antagonist for the franchise's first chapter, Gods and Monsters. Although not seen in the trailer, we do know that Nathan Fillion will reprise his role as Guy Gardner from Superman and Peacemaker Season 2, while Danish actor Ulrich Thomsen is cast as Sinestro. We do get a look at Paul Ben Victor's character, Antan, who, despite appearing human in the teaser, is supposedly playing some form of extraterrestrial. Now, a live-action Green Lantern show has been in various forms of development for several years at this point, dating back to before James Gunn took over DC Films. After the negative response to the 2011 film and the canceled plans to feature a Lantern in Zack Snyder's Justice League, sorry, Wayne T. Carr, you'll always be my Green Lantern in images. Wayne T. Carr, baby. That's the guy right there. Fuck me. It was announced in 2019 that Greg Berlanti was developing Green Lantern for HBO Max. No shade to the Arrowverse, it has its place and everything, but thank God that never came to fruition. The series would feature some of the Corps' less high-profile members, with Finn Wittrock and Jeremy Irvine reportedly being cast as Guy Gardner and Alan Scott, respectively. The version of the show was scrapped in early 2022 following Discovery's takeover of Warner Brothers and the subsequent creative shakeup at DC, leading to Gunn and Safran the following year announcing a brand new Lanterns project that would focus on arguably the two most famous wearers of the iconic ring, Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart. Before we talk about those two characters, though, I want to take a second and spotlight those involved with making this series, because there's some frankly incredible names attached, and I think this is why I'm not really surprised that the version of the show that we seem to be getting is the version of the show that we seem to be getting. But it's also what makes me super excited about the potential this show has to be one of the great superhero TV shows. Lanterns is the product of showrunner Chris Mundy, best known for his work on Ozark and True Detective, and producers Damon Lindelof and Tom King. If you're a fan of TV, you know Damon Lindelof. He's the creator of Lost, The Leftovers, and most importantly, HBO's magnificent 2019 show, Watchmen. Joining him and Mundy is Tom King, a comic book writer known for the likes of Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, and Mr. Miracle, both set to have their own DCU adaptations, and also the writer of one of my favorite comic book arcs things ever made in Visions. And he's also someone who's become a key part of James Gunn's brain trust when mapping out this universe. This trio are known for their prestige works. Mundy's Ozark is one of the most critically acclaimed shows in recent years. Watchmen was a series nobody expected to be as good or as smart and nuanced as it was, and King, while being a polarizing writer to some fans, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, has a proven track record when it comes to grounding these otherwise fantastical heroes and showcase the gritty realities within their lives. Although I know a lot of people were hoping for a cosmic-centric Green Lantern show, one centered around the core, Oa, and the wide array of high-concept threats the likes of Hal and John regularly face, something like, I don't know, Buzz Lightyear Star Command, honestly, because that's basically a Green Lantern show, I think this more grounded approach could lend itself to a deep character study of both men and help fully endear them to a new generation of fans before we then, leave reality and go explore the cosmos. Even the most casual DC fan knows the names of Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart. Whether it's through the comics, the beloved Justice League cartoons, video games like Injustice, or the countless animated films, they are some of the most acclaimed heroes in the entire DC universe. And I think the great thing about both of them is that given what generation you grew up in, they are the definitive Green Lanterns for you. Like for me, Green Lantern was always Jon Stewart, and that's because I grew up on Justice League the Animated Series, but I was very much aware of Hal Jordan and the impact and importance of that character. It's just, whenever I think of Green Lantern, I always think of Jon Stewart, and I think that's kind of cool that someone else might think of Hal Jordan. I mean, there's even others like Guy Gardner and Kyle Rayner. I mean, they're definitely not the de facto Green Lanterns. Like, I think some people may think of them, but you're probably pretty deep in the weeds in comics if, like, your initial go-to Green Lantern is Kyle Rayner. Like, great character, not going to deny that, but it's like, come on, it's Jon Stewart, Hal Jordan. Those are the guys. Hal's origin is typically that of a cocky, fearless test pilot who inherits the ring after encountering an alien who crash lands on Earth, being selected to join the Corps due to his unyielding willpower, determination, and headstrong nature, even if it causes him to often butt heads with other heroes and the Guardians of the Universe. He's a founding member of the Justice League and was the flagship Green Lantern from his debut all the way to the mid-1990s. So for a lot of comic readers, Hal is the guy. That's your intro to Green Lantern. However, like I mentioned, my intro was Jon Stewart, and I think a lot of people who grew up on the DC animated universe, that's your guy. John is one of the first prominent African-American heroes in mainstream comics, a longtime fan favorite and a character with a complex and fascinating origin. His tenure as a Marine makes him disciplined, precise, and tactically brilliant. At the same time, his architectural background enables him to create complex, hyper-detailed constructs and to solve problems and see the world in 3 dimensions. He's the cool-headed, logical counterpart to Hal's more emotional and brash approach. Stewart, in his early appearances, was introduced as a substitute Green Lantern, enlisted to step in for an injured Guy Gardner and be trained by Jordan. Perhaps this is why Hal takes John under his wing in the show. We do know that Guy Gardner is going to be in the series, so maybe something happens with Guy where the Corps is like, hey, can this guy step in and help? So I don't know. That being said, given the nature of this show, it looks like Hal has been out of communications, out of touch with the Corps for some time. So I don't think they would trust Hal to train John unless they literally had no other choice, which maybe is the case. Maybe that's the case. I have no idea. But it would be a cool way of tying in John's actual comics origin with, I guess, how he becomes Green Lantern in this show. In fact, the substitute line specifically is mirrored in the teaser's opening exchange, where Hal mockingly calls John a substitute teacher.
You're just a fucking substitute teacher. You're not ready to get up in front of the class until the ring says you are.
Hal also states that John isn't ready to get up in front of the class until he's chosen by the ring, which seemingly reveals that John doesn't yet have his own Green Lantern ring. Hal even proves this by taking off his ring and jumping out of the moving vehicle, testing whether the ring will select John in his absence. Given that Lanterns is all about these two men, their relationship, and journey as heroes and protectors, I imagine this dynamic will be a big part of the series. The trailer frequently highlights their ideological differences alongside Hal's daredevil-like mentorship, jumping out of moving cars to make a point, whereas John appears more calculated and driven by reason and a deep connection and understanding of people, whereas it looks like Hal is just someone who's just kind of, he's seen it all and he's ready to write people off, and he's gonna save the world his way, and if you don't agree with that, that's your problem. Even though this first trailer doesn't give us a huge amount plot-wise, I think there's still some notable influences on display that are worth mentioning. When James Gunn took to social media to announce this incoming trailer, he did so with an image that featured two comics. Green Lantern number 87 from December 1971, John Stewart's first appearance in a comic that outlines his origin and philosophical differences to Hal, and 2005's Green Lantern number 1, the start of Jeff Johns' acclaimed 9-year run that reintroduced Hal Jordan and established the emotional spectrum. These might have been featured as two seminal issues of Green Lantern comics, but still, they might also indicate some of the show's overarching direction and focus, highlighting both men's backstories, how and why they became members of the Corps, and the undercurrent tensions regarding how each sees their duties as Lanterns, and how eventually they may find themselves on opposite sides. One of the biggest theories out there right now is that the show may be adapting ideas from the 1994 comic story Emerald Twilight. For those unaware, this story saw Hal suffer a mental breakdown after his hometown was destroyed by villains, causing him to betray the Corps and the Guardians, slaughtering his former friends and becoming the evil Parallax. Not that Parallax from the 2011 film. That's not Parallax. That's a very bad cloud thing. This ultimately led to the introduction of Kyle Rayner and established Jordan as a major villain throughout the 90s. While the show appears to be far more earthbound, dealing with Hal and John investigating either a murder or a conspiracy, Kyle Chandler's portrayal of Hal appears to be a more jaded and cynical version of the character than we're used to. In the trailer, we get a sense of his disillusionment with the Corps, and maybe he's training John alone without the knowledge of Oa, the Guardians, or the wider system he's supposed to be a part of. The sequence in the car even suggests that John might not have his own ring and is simply learning from Hal without a full understanding of what a Green Lantern actually is. This might even extend to the quick glimpse we get of the Green Lantern costume, seen stashed away in a closet, covered in dust with its trademark colors muted. Could this be a case of bad costume design and the typical superhero movie color grading problem? I mean, sure, maybe. But James Gunn had no problem displaying the color and comic bookiness of the Lanterns with Guy Gardner in Superman, so it makes me think this more muted approach might be an intentional choice, denoting Hal's state of mind and detachment from the responsibilities of being a Green Lantern. This more cynical Hal could prove to be a great foil for Aaron Pierre's John Stewart, an aspiring Lantern who fully believes in the cause he's signed up for. Despite being a character whose backstory is defined by war, trauma, and prejudice, John might be the idealist of this duo, an ex-soldier turned builder who has seen the horrors humanity can inflict, yet still believes in hope and in protecting those in need. Speaking with Deadline last October, showrunner Chris Mundy discussed the relationship between John and Hal on the show, as well as the season's overarching theme. He states, "Our show is in a lot of ways about replacement. When should someone step aside, and when is it time for the next person to take the reins? That push and pull between those two characters is really important. So much of the power that John has is not taking the bait, understanding that you lose your power if you're yelling and screaming. That's what we're trying to convey. He knows he belongs, so he doesn't have to overcompensate." It's also true that while a great actor and an inspired piece of casting, Kyle Chandler is significantly older than your typical Hal Jordan. Hal is usually portrayed as in his 30s or even 40s, but Chandler, if you can believe it, is 60 years old. Guy looks fantastic. I hope I look that incredible when I hit 60. I remember reading reports when he and Aaron Pierre were cast that while Pierre signed a multi-project deal for the DCU, Chandler's commitment was only to this specific project, raising alarm bells that Hal either dies or becomes a twist villain that John must defeat in his ascension to becoming the universe's primary Lantern. Even beyond that, having the two characters be of different generations could be an interesting approach. Sure, it's a well-known trope to have westerns and cop dramas, to have the tired, disillusioned mentor and his idealistic protege, but this, combined with their different lived experiences and backgrounds, could lead to further friction between the duo as the show progresses. There's a moment in the trailer where John declares he does a better job protecting people than Hal, and just overall, there's this undercurrent of Stewart being more ready to take over the mantle and become the Green Lantern, and Jordan's inability to let go or recognize he's past his best. Perhaps he's in denial, or there's something sinister going on, or maybe it's just a clash of two headstrong individuals with different views on what being a Lantern means and what being a hero means that will ultimately clash when whatever mystery they're investigating is exposed. With Lindelof at the helm, I wouldn't be surprised if it was this commentary on the growing cultural divide between generations we see in the real world and the inability for both generations to have a dialogue. John's journey in the series could be about tipping the scales of power toward the younger generations, the ones most directly affected by the older ones' actions, which reflects how, in reality, power is withheld from younger generations. Decisions are being made without consideration for our future and by people who won't be around to see the consequences. I think this cross-generational conflict is the root of many of the problems we're facing today, and making it a central theme of this series will hit pretty hard. Although this approach would be interesting and clearly sets John up to be our main DCU Green Lantern long-term, part of me finds it quite similar to how Marvel handled Ant-Man, using the classic iteration, Hank Pym, almost exclusively as a mentor for his successor, Scott Lang. And look, if you've watched this channel, if you've followed me for any amount of time, you know I love the Ant-Man films. Yes, I will even go to bat for Quantumania, despite all the shit that gets thrown at it. I think there's some fun to be had, and there's some good ideas in that film. Regardless, I think that dynamic between Scott and Hank in those films is compelling, and it's a great way to take multiple versions of these characters and kind of work them into a story. But I wouldn't be lying if I said that I didn't wish we had gotten a proper Hank Pym in his prime, because I do think Michael Douglas is a perfect Hank Pym. I just kind of wish that, we could have gotten Michael Douglas in his prime as Hank Pym, but, alas. And the same is kind of true with Kyle Chandler and Hal Jordan. Kyle Chandler is perfect, absolute pitch perfect casting for Hal Jordan. I just wish we would have seen him in his prime as this character. I want Hal Jordan in his prime, because for both of these characters, Hank Pym and Hal Jordan, they're incredibly rich characters who probably shouldn't be sidelined for the sole purpose of elevating the next guy. Now, granted, when the next guy is Jon Stewart, I fucking get it, because again, Jon Stewart's perfect, but I think there's something to be said about the fact that Jon Stewart and Hal Jordan have existed alongside each other in the comics for over 50 years, which is the thing that separates the Ant-Man dynamic, the Hank Pym and Scott Lang thing. With all of that said, DC recently told a similar story in the animated film Green Lantern's Beware My Power. Released in 2022, it focuses on John's recruitment to the Corps after Jordan goes missing, only to reveal later that he is, you guessed it, the sinister Parallax, whom Stewart must defeat to both save the universe and fully establish himself as a key part of the Corps. This is all just rampant speculation on my part, but watching the trailer does make me think that this could be a direction James Gunn and the show's producers want to go with Green Lantern. Gunn's Superman already established Clark as the first of a new generation of superheroes battling against the cynicism of their predecessors, and even his own lineage and how they define governance and power and all that. If Superman is to form a Justice League, he'll need like-minded people who share that belief. And Jon Stewart, having been at ideological odds with Hal and then forced to fight his former mentor, would be a perfect candidate to join this ensemble. The Parallax theory could tie into the show's central premise. Hal and John in Nebraska to investigate a mystery. There's a moment in the teaser where Jordan quite ominously says,
"Something is off here. I can feel it."
Potentially referring to how, in the comics, Parallax targeted and possessed Hal, playing off his grief after a personal loss and causing him to turn bad. The Parallax entity is also depicted as the source of the Yellow Lanterns, the embodiments of fear led by Sinestro. Given that we know Sinestro will be in the show, and this shot of John being ambushed by an unknown figure wielding a weapon that's emitting yellow energy, I think this is a plausible direction the series might be going in. Hell, it may even explain why the series is called just lanterns, if the twist is that Hal isn't actually part of the Green Lantern Corps anymore and is instead working on behalf of Parallax and the Yellow Lanterns. I think it also ties in thematically with the idea that Hal, he doesn't embody the ideal of a Green Lantern anymore, and John himself isn't quite a Green Lantern yet, so these are just guys that are in this weird limbo state trying to figure out who they are and trying to, work through that. If the Green Lantern is supposed to embody this epitome of good and virtue and righteousness, Hal might still be thinking like a hero. He might still think that he is being the good guy and acting nobly, but the things that he's seen and how that has impacted how he approaches heroism and how you have to be a bit more realistic and you can't have all of these ideas. You can't save people. If people die because of collateral damage, that's just the way it is. The mission is the most important thing. Well, that's not really a Green Lantern now, is it? And I think what's great about that, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is that John, being a former military guy, who has seen all of these things, who you would think would share a similar worldview, and this is probably why Hal thinks that he can win him over to his side, doesn't believe in that. He actually uses everything that he's seen in order to advocate for the opposite, in order to advocate for the fact that, no, this is why we need to prevent this stuff from happening. We need to be better. We need to be beacons of hope. We need to be this green beam of light in the sky that people can look to and feel inspired by, similar to Superman. We can't bring ourselves down to Earth's level. And I think that's also kind of very intentional that the show seems to be taking place on that grounded, earthbound level, because it speaks to where Hal is operating at this point in time. His head isn't in the stars. He isn't thinking big picture. He isn't thinking optimistically. He's thinking like an old, jaded human would, who feels that there's no other choice but to just give in to the cruelty of the world and kind of navigate it the best you can. Another moment in the trailer that really stuck out with me came right at the end, when John asks Hal about meeting the other Lanterns. Jordan's response is surprisingly dismissive, mockingly saying that,
I'm the only human, they're aliens. One of them's a fucking squirrel.
Initially, this felt a little out of character to me. Hal is usually depicted as a major player in the larger Corps, regularly teaming up with extraterrestrial lanterns like Kilowog, Tomar-Ray, and his mentor, Sinestro, and having strong relationships with Corps members from a variety of species. Quick side note, given the fact that Hal's mentor is Sinestro, maybe this show could be tackling the idea of how Hal's experience with Sinestro and understanding that Sinestro becomes the leader of the Yellow Lantern Corps and everything like that, and maybe there's a moment where Hal feels betrayed by Sinestro, and then that's his big, Chinatown moment where everything kind of becomes clear to him and that there's no being good in this world. People don't stay good, they compromise in ways. And so there's this toxic cycle of mentorship and proteges, and instead of the protege being better than the mentor, there's this idea that it's like, no, they're a product of that mentor, and we shouldn't expect them to be better. In fact, the only thing that's going to happen is that they're going to be worse. Hal turning into Parallax is arguably worse than Sinestro being like this kind of Yellow Lantern anti-hero. And so it takes someone with strong will, stronger will than Hal ever had in John Stewart, in order to break the cycle. Now, I get it, that could probably be seen as maybe doing Hal Jordan a little dirty there, but I do think it makes for a compelling narrative despite the fact. But going back to this exchange, we already know that Hal isn't the only human Lantern, because we met Guy Gardner first in 2025's Superman, and Nathan Fillion is set to appear in this show. Upon further reflection, though, I don't think we should be taking this line literally. Instead, I believe it tells us more about Hal's headspace and worldview at the point when we're meeting him. It almost feels like he's disillusioned with the Corps. He disapproves of their methods. He finds them to be hypocritical or something. I have no idea. And taking it upon himself to train John without the knowledge or oversight of the larger organization. There's even a vague undercurrent of prejudice to Jordan's response, with how dismissive he is of being friendly with aliens. Going back to my Parallax theory, the entity in the Yellow Lanterns feed off fear. It's what gives them power and puts them at odds with the Green Lanterns and their power source, will. A novel approach to handling these concepts in a more grounded setting would be to examine how fear manifests in individuals and in a rural town like the show's setting. Maybe topics like prejudice towards aliens, immigrants, and marginalized people, the latter of which are incredibly topical in today's political climate, obviously, could be interrogated to demonstrate how easily fear spreads and can consume people, with Parallax being the physical manifestation of these anxieties that ultimately preys on Hal's world weariness. I mean, specifically in America, we are literally being governed by people using and leveraging fear as a means to get people to do what they want, and ultimately how that dehumanizes other people. And so you have Jon Stewart standing in opposition to that. I think that would be an absolutely inspired way to tackle the ideas of will and fear and these things that are intrinsic to the Green Lantern mythos. Taking the Parallax character from the comics and making it a living embodiment of real-world fears and moral panics could be a very smart and nuanced approach to this topic, in keeping with the show's premise of a more grounded and real-world iteration of the Lantern myth. It also makes me wonder if the reason Jordan is training Stewart has something to do with this. We know they're likely sharing one ring when the show starts, and that ring is powered by will, so maybe Hal is losing his will and purity, and that's why he needs Jon to step in. Despite his lived experiences as both a soldier and a person of color, having experienced prejudice firsthand throughout his life and being used by bad actors in positions of power, especially as a soldier, Jon still sees the good in people, believes in humanity, and Hal, under the influence of Parallax, could be using that to retain control of his ring to enact whatever plan he has in the series. This is all pure speculation on my part, but the more I think about it, the more I could see Gunn, Mundy, and, company wanting to use the idea of Parallax in this way. We know James Gunn is a huge fan of 90s DC, so adapting a story like Emerald Twilight makes a lot of sense, with Mundy, King, and Lindelof translating it through the format and tone of a gritty HBO crime drama. Another comic book storyline I wanted to shout out is Hard Traveling Heroes from O'Neill and Adams' 1970s run on Green Lantern and Green Arrow. Now, I don't expect, Stephen Amell or any other version of Oliver Queen to show up in this project. Still, that series took Hal Jordan away from his interstellar adventures and literally brought him down to Earth as he and Green Arrow traversed the US and encountered real-world social problems like racism, inequality, and drug abuse, and were forced to consider their roles as protectors of a world gone wrong. Given how prestigious this comic run is, it's not a reach to suggest it might have had some influence on the show's more grounded direction, telling the story of Hal's fall and Jon's rise, all while showing the Lanterns dealing with everyday problems on Earth, as well as their responsibilities in the stars. It might even be the case that Jordan is specifically training Jon on Earth, teaching him and testing him at home before he earns the ring and ventures into space to formally join the Corps. With all of this said, I do have a few concerns, I guess, maybe a few complaints from this first teaser. My biggest issue is its overall vagueness, I guess. I mean, this could literally be a teaser about any show, about anything. There's literally nothing inherently Lanterns-esque about it. If I watch this teaser without any context, it comes across more like the next season of True Detective or Ozark Light, a great show, but not exactly my first thoughts when picturing Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart in a TV series. But then, I remember that this series is literally made by the brains behind True Detective and Ozark, so maybe we should just let it play out. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I guess I'm in the minority here, given how the internet reacted when the trailer dropped on Wednesday, but you know what? Fuck it, who cares? Despite my few reservations, I am so in, I guess cautiously, on Lanterns. Don't get me wrong, would I have loved an epic big budget space drama that captures the best of Green Lantern comics? Yeah, of course, but I also appreciate how talented writers and storytellers can reinvent these classic characters in new ways and put a fresh spin on an established archetype to make them resonate with today's world and problems. A straight-up Green Lantern show might have been a safer bet, but there's something about the fact that this is taking the Corps in a unique direction that I can't help but be intrigued by. Will it work? Who knows? But at least DC are trying to shake things up and break up the monotony of your usual formulaic superhero TV show. When he took over as co-chair of DC Studios, James Gunn promised elasticity, producing a wide range of creator-driven, tonally and stylistically distinct projects. If true, Lanterns shouldn't feel exactly like Superman, Peacemaker, or Supergirl. And even though I understand everyone's frustrations, you can't deny he's been true to his word. If done well, this could be a great showcase of the variety that DC has to offer. This can be the studio that gives you Superman, the Penguin, Lanterns, and a whole host of other crazy and bold projects along the way, and fingers crossed that Lanterns deliver on these expectations and shines a bright light on the exciting future of DC on the big and small screens.